Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Arkansas Alive. I'm Happy Caldwell, and I want to talk to you all this week about a story of faith. It's called Job. The book of Job is a story of faith, and I think it'll help you relate to what goes on in the world around you. So stay tuned. Arkansas Alive begins right now. Thanks for joining me for today's edition of Arkansas Alive, and we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday in the book of Job, chapter 1. Now, if you were watching yesterday, you found out who Job was, the man that the Bible describes as Job, a righteous man, a wealthy man, one that feared God and shunned evil. And God had blessed him and prospered him. He lived under a different covenant than we do today. The Bible says we have a new and better covenant in Hebrews, built on better promises and in the hands of a better mediator. But nevertheless, Job was true to his covenant. Now, the reason this is important, and I always like to point this out, I am a great defender of the faith. I am a great defender of God. I don't mean that God needs help. He can take care of himself. But I like to defend God's position. He's a good God. James said, let no man say when he's tempted of evil that he's tempted of God. For God is not tempted with evil, neither he tempteth any man with evil. So when tragedy strikes, in the form of disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever the case may be, if your life is seemingly destroyed, you're having to rebuild, or sickness and disease has destroyed your family, deaths in the family, you have to know these things or you'll not recover. And God is about recovering. God's about overcoming. You know, where death is concerned, if we have a death in our family, our spouse, our children, our parents, our grandparents, even though whoever we're close to, it's a challenge because they're gone. They're not in your life anymore. But Paul said to sorrow not as those, now watch this, sorrow not as those who have no hope. Those that don't know the Lord, those that don't know the Scriptures, are hopeless. When you hear people use those terms, it's just hopeless. We're hopeless. We've lost everything. I understand. I've experienced loss in my life. You've experienced loss in your life. But it's not hopeless unless you don't know the Lord and you don't know the Word of the Lord. But if you know the Lord, you know the Word of the Lord, nothing is hopeless. We become hopeful. We become full of hope. Oh, yes, we've experienced tragedy, loss, destruction, and so forth. So did Job. But let's find out what Job did and how God responded to him. And it'll make a big difference. Now, you're going to have to drop your tradition. You're going to have to throw all your religion and tradition that you've learned over the years. Talked about Job like poor old Job's turkey, or move over Job, or you just have to let me sit down. You have to get rid of all that because Job didn't have any turkeys in the first place, and if he'd had any, he'd had thousands of them because he was the richest man in the East. But he lost everything that he had, and it's very faith-building to see what he did. Oh, he said some things that were not correct. He made mistakes. He said things that were not true about God. And God corrected him. But the end result was that God gave him back twice what he had before. Now, let's join Job and the conversation between God and Satan in verse 10. Now, God's already said to Satan, okay, why have you considered my servant Job? And the marginal reference is, why have you set your heart on my man Job? Why are you going after him? This was not a taffy pull. This was not God and Satan having fun with Job. Satan has a reason, and he tells that the Scriptures tell us what that reason is. Verse 10, and Satan says to God, haven't you made a hedge around about him and his house and about all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands. His substance is increased in the land. In other words, this was a blessed man, a wealthy man. I mean, he was protected, top to the bottom and all the way around. He had a hedge around about him that God put there to protect him and keep him from evil. Now, if God did that for Job under his covenant, he's done that for you under your covenant. And you have a better covenant than Job had. It says that in Hebrews, built on better promises in the hands of a better mediator. Keep reading, verse 11. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, and he'll curse you to his face, to your face. Now, this was Satan's MO. This was what he was trying to prove. He was trying to prove that no man would serve God just because he's God. His thinking was, Job is serving and is loyal and faithful to God because what God's given him, how God's blessed him. He's made him rich. He's made him wealthy. He's protected him. But if you'll take the hedge down, God, and let me get at him, he said he'll curse you to your face. And the Lord said, Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, or in your hand or authority. Now, what did he mean by that? See, a lot of people think that God gave Satan permission. He did not give him permission. There's nowhere that suggests that God gave Satan permission to attack Job. There would have been no point in that. It would have violated God's DNA and his MO. So what did he mean by that? Okay, go over to Luke chapter 4. Let's look at Luke chapter 4, and let's look at where Satan tempts Jesus in the desert. And in Luke chapter 4 and verse 6, and the devil said to Jesus, all this power will I give you, and the glory of them, for that it is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give it. What is Satan talking about? He's tempting Jesus. He said, all this power that I have, I will give it to you if you will bow down and worship me. Of course, Jesus was not going to do that, and he told him so. But Satan was referring back to the usurping of authority and power that took place in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, Lucifer came in. He borrowed the body of a snake, and he was a serpent and beautiful, apparently. And he deceived Eve, but Adam willfully, knowingly disobeyed God. He did what God told him not to do. And so he turned over his authority that he'd gotten from God to be ruler of the earth. He turned it over to Satan. So Satan walked out of the garden with the authority and power that God had given to Adam. Now, this is a very unique revelation. God cannot go and slap Satan upside the head and take back his power and authority that he gave Adam, because God is a God of integrity and honor and trust, and he gave that authority and power to Adam. It was Adam's. It was Adam's to use, to do, to take ownership of, so he could rule and reign on the earth. God set him up that way, gave it to him, and said, it is yours. So Satan reminds God and said, you've built a hedge around about this man. I can't get to him. And he, in verse 12, and the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. In other words, you usurped the power that God gave Adam, that I gave Adam, and you have that power, and it's yours. I mean, it's hard to imagine a God like this that is that is love and is integrity. If God had taken back what he gave Adam, if he had violated his own word, then the whole kingdom of God would have come crumbling down, because God is only as good and strong as his word. Let me give you a little personal example. Over the years, I have been able to bless my son. I have given him 3 automobiles that the Lord told me to give him. And the last one was a very nice automobile. It wasn't brand new, but it looked brand new, and it was it was a good-looking car and a good car. And the Lord told me to give it to him. I knew when I bought it that I was going to give it to him. And I was visiting my son a few months ago. I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and he picked me up at the hotel. Jeannie and I were visiting, and he picked us up, and I got in that car, and I looked at that car, and I thought, wow, man, maybe I was premature. Maybe I didn't hear God. Maybe I should keep this car. No, I can't do that, or I'd be violating what the Lord told me to do. So I have to live by my word. God lives by his word. Have you ever given something to somebody and think, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that, I'm going to take that back? No. I remember one time here in our home state of Arkansas, city of Little Rock, where we live, there was a pastor friend of mine that was building a church, and I wanted to help him. I mean, I wanted to give him some money to help him build the church, and so I did. I asked the Lord, what do you want me to do? And he told me what to send, and I did. A month later, I found out, much to my shock, that he had been having an affair and committing adultery, and his church and his wife found out about it, and they required him to step down from his position as pastor, and they, ended the building program. And I thought to myself, Lord, you knew this was going on, but you told me to give that money to them. I tell you what, I'm going to go get it back. I'm going to go ask for them to refund my money. And the Lord said, no, you're not. He said, you didn't give that money to them. You gave that to me. You obeyed me. I'm the one that asked you to do this. So your covenant action, your obedience was to me, not to them. So I left it alone. I left it there. Now, these are just personal examples, but on a much bigger scale, here's God. He has given power and authority to Adam. Adam gives it to Satan, to the serpent. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only upon himself put forth not your hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And there was a day, he goes on, when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing, the asses feeding alongside them, and the Sabaeans, enemies, fell upon them, took them away, and they've slain your servants with the edge of the sword, and I only have escaped to tell you about it. And while he was yet speaking, there came another one of his servants and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only have escaped alone to tell you. Well, there are things in the Bible that are not true. I know that may be a shock to you. Yeah, and this is one of them. This man reported that the fire of God is fallen. Well, it wasn't the fire of God. It wasn't the fire of God at all, but they thought it was. And this is how we get in trouble. A lot of times we quote things that we think are God, we think are real, because this is what we've heard religiously and traditionally. But it wasn't the fire of God. But they thought it was. So that was not true. So he said, the fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. Verse 17, while he was yet speaking, there came another one of his servants and said, "The Chaldeans made out 3 bands and have fell upon the camels and carried them all away and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am alone, have escaped alone to tell you." And it goes on, gets worse. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold," now listen to this very carefully, "there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of their house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and I only am escaped alone to tell you." This was what we would consider, what we would call today, a tornado. On land, a tornado. At sea, a hurricane. It was a storm. It was a deadly killer tornado, if you please. And he said, "This great wind came from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of your house, and it fell upon them, and they are dead." Have we seen this? Have we seen this reenacted before? Many times. Tornadoes, hurricanes. We've seen this happen. Tragedy, destruction, people dying, houses blown away, towns blown away. We've seen this over the decades and centuries. We've seen these kind of things. And let me just say this while we're here. A perversion of nature, and you can go back to Jesus in the boat when he was with his disciples and a storm arose on the Sea of Galilee. And I've been on the Sea of Galilee, and it's a big body of water, but it's fresh water, but a storm can come up so quick, just like that. And they were concerned, they were afraid. Jesus was asleep in the bow of the boat, and they woke him up and said, "Master, don't you care? We're dying here, we're perishing. Do something." And Jesus just turned very calmly and rebuked the storm and spoke to it and spoke to the wind and spoke to the waves. Now, Rick Renner, a Greek scholar, he translated that and said what Jesus actually said to the wind and the waves is, "Shh, be still." Say that out loud. Shh, be still. It has a calming effect. That's what we do to children. Shh, go to sleep. Jesus rebuked the storm. Why? That storm was not sent by God. If God had sent the storm to chasten, to correct, to whatever, and Jesus rebuked it, then that would have been a house divided against itself. God and Jesus would have been fighting each other. And the Bible plainly tells us that Jesus is God in the flesh. He's the incarnate Son of God. So if that were the case, if God sent the storm to correct and to wrath and so forth, and Jesus rebukes it, then they're working against each other. So we know that the storm was not from God. I heard a minister say one time, he was saying, pray because God's fed up with all the sin on the East Coast and He's sending a hurricane to cleanse it out. That is totally unscriptural, totally wrong about God. God's fed up with sin, but He put sin on Jesus on the cross at Calvary and satisfied the claims of justice. And God is not sending hurricanes and tornadoes to kill, steal, and destroy. That's Satan's MO, not God's. And this preacher went on to say, after he said that God's sending the hurricane, he said, now let's pray. And I thought, I'm going to stay tuned here. I'm going to listen to what he prays, because he said that the hurricane was from God. Now who's he praying to? He's praying to God. What's he praying? Oh, Lord, stop this hurricane. Hey, God's not sending the hurricane. But the preacher said he believed God did send it. So you're asking God to be double-minded, and He's sending the hurricane to cleanse and chastise on one hand, and yet you're praying for Him not to send it on the other. Make up your mind. You're the one that's double-minded, not God. God didn't send the hurricane. God didn't send the tornado. God didn't send the pandemic, the disease, the plague, the virus. He didn't send those things. He doesn't send the heart attacks and the car wrecks and so forth. I'm going to tell you, the Bible tells you where all this comes from. So Jesus rebukes the wind and the sea. It's calmed down. And the disciples say, wow, look at this. Man, what manner of man is this? He speaks to the wind. He speaks to the waves. All right. One day I was meditating on this. And also another thing Rick Renner discovered when he did the research. Storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, things that steal, kill, and destroy. The wind and the waves, of course the waves are produced by the wind. But all of these things are natural functions of weather patterns. Rain, wind. But when they become destructive, now listen carefully, and you can help. When they become destructive, when they steal, kill, and destroy, now you automatically should know that that's Satan's MO. Jesus said it in John chapter 10. He said the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So if it steals, kills, or destroys, it's not God. God is not going to break your arm to show you He can fix it. And if you dive deep into this, you'll find there are cause and effect. There are reasons why calamity comes. There's a reason why tornadoes and hurricanes and winds and floods and so forth. There's a reason for these things to come. And it's both spiritual and physical. So after Jesus spoke to the wind and the waves and they stopped, they said, what manner of man is this? And Jesus said to them, where is your faith? You could have done this. You didn't have to, he didn't say this, but you didn't have to wake me up. You could have taken care of this yourself. Why didn't you? My brother and sister, the next time you hear the tornado sirens go off, next time you hear the weather reports, go outside and talk to those elements. See, what happens when a storm becomes destructive, it's been perverted from its normal purpose. Wind and rain are normal. They have a purpose. Have you noticed that in the wintertime, the wind comes and blows all the leaves off the trees? Have you noticed that the rain waters the ground, waters the crops, washes away the pollen? There are always natural benefits and reasons for weather patterns. But when weather patterns are destructive, they've been perverted. When you have clouds, thunderstorms, when you have the atmospheric changes, when you have the dew point dropping, now I don't know all there is to know about meteorology and weather stuff, but I do know enough to know that if you watch the weather people when they're tracking a storm, they will say there is rotation embedded in this thunderstorm. Did you get that? In the thunderstorm, there is rotation embedded in that thunderstorm. All right. I've studied as much as I can. That rotation is horizontal. And it is not destructive until, and what I've read, nobody knows what causes or why the rotation turns vertical. It's horizontal. It's rotating. It's rolling in that thunderstorm. And that thunderstorm's coming. And by radar, they can see the rotation in there. But nobody knows exactly what causes that rotation to go from horizontal to vertical. And when it goes vertical is when the destruction takes place. And that rotation going vertical is what travels along the ground and destroys property and real estate. So what we have to do is understand that this is not God. This is a perversion of nature. And there is no such person as Mother Nature, okay? That's a myth. That's a fallacy. That's just somebody's idea. Mother Nature is not God's wife. There is no such thing as Mother Nature. Well, I might as well go over there and read this right now. Let's go over to 1 Corinthians to give you a better idea and understanding of where these things come from. Of course, I've already told you that the first thing is that they are being perverted. These normal, natural weather patterns are being distorted. They're being demonized, if you please. These are demon spirits. Now, this might get too wild for some of you, but there are demon spirits that are perverting weather. They're the ones that are perverting. I know in the spirit what causes the tornadoes and hurricanes. What I don't know is in the natural, and I'm looking for answers. If you're a meteorologist or you know something about these things, I don't know in the natural what causes these things. I do know in the spirit, these are demonic spirits that are perverting natural systems, perverting natural weather to destroy. That I do know. Now, go to 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. Therefore, no temptation has taken you, but as such is common to man. God is faithful. He will not allow you to suffer or to be tempted above that you are able to deal with, but will make the way for you to escape, that you may bear it, not take it upon yourself bearing it, but you may deal with it. So there are things, it says, these temptations are common to man, common to fallen man. This is common to fallen man, fallen nature, the Adamic nature that we all inherited from Adam. Our culture is a fallen culture, full of fallen people. And these are things that are common to fallen man because they have received the nature of the devil in themselves. And this is why you see the stealing, killing, and destroying. If we could only get politicians and legislators to understand this, I think they'd be more sensitive and more aware of why we need to deal with certain things with laws, and it would change our community. Now, I'm going to stop there for today. We'll pick this up tomorrow. We're still seeing what God had to say to Job and what Job's response was. Join me tomorrow. Remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas and where you're watching too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on Twitter at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.